Hello, we are now live with the number 24th edition of the NPM Feedback Triage meeting. Today I am joined by Ed Thompson. I am Miles Borens. We are the two product managers from GitHub who are primarily focused on NPM, although we do have lofty ideas that involve the entire internet and all of software. But for today, we are humbly scoped to NPM. We have an agenda of different topics. The agenda is created by me kind of going through the existing discussions on github.com/npm/discussions that have not been answered. We've started to identify some high level topic areas that are kind of like right now. We'll go through and review some of the ones that we've already prioritized work on, and then we'll discuss a couple other topics that sort into particular areas. We're close to the holidays, so we're a little lighter staffed today for this meeting than usual. As such, we may not dig into every topic as not all the stakeholders here, and the meeting may even wrap a little early so we can reclaim a bit of time. But for now, let's get started with the first topic. And you know what, let me go ahead and share my screen so we could take a look at them as we go. So the first topic that we have is package metadata review. So there's a handful of different package metadata items that we are working on the roadmap right now. So we can see here, if we go to the roadmap site and we actually open the public roadmap itself, which is a project board, we could see, we have a bunch of different things that are in here, in particular around package metadata that is going on this quarter. We've got show download usage by version. We've got use GitHub flavor markdown for README rendering, and show TypeScript information for packages that have declarations. All three of these are going to be pretty decent step forwards, improving the landing pages. We have some other stuff on here as well, including making the repo for a package more prominent. Ed, would you like to talk about this work and where we're at right now? Oh, Darcy and Roy are joining us. Hello, Darcy and Roy.
Hey, so for
Ed,
going?
No problem.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So the work that's ongoing here, the engineering team is tackling all of these things in parallel. So I think, if I had to get my crystal ball out, the first thing that's actually gonna land publicly is the GitHub flavored markdown for README rendering. We're I think pretty close on that. I expect to see that definitely this quarter. So I'm really excited about that. It's a nice fix to align the actual markdown formats that the two different websites use, because a lot of people, of course, put check a README into their repo on GitHub. You would expect that to render in the GitHub UI the same way that once the README lands in your package, that it renders in the npmjs.com UI. So that'll be a nice fix. Download usage by version is gaining steam. One of the unfortunate things is that we don't necessarily have all the data there to go back historically. So we're actually going to have to do this a bit incrementally. So we'll first start collecting the data. Once we have about a week's worth of data, we'll be able to show you a week's worth of data. And then we'll keep collecting that. And so we'll show you better visualization over time as we continue to collect more data on this information, on the download counts by version. And then, of course, TypeScript, I'm really excited about. We can look and see what's bundled in your package to show you TypeScript information. We can also link to definitely typed packages if those exist for a particular package. So I think that this is going to be, as somebody who dabbles in TypeScript myself, I'm actually really excited about this, because sometimes I install a package and then I don't have types for it. So I want to be able to find those really easily. So I think that these are going to be some nice improvements.
Excellent, great. And then we did have two more items that came up that kind of slot into this talk that were, I would say, like the kind of primary place where we're doing engineering work on the registry right now. So one is add sorts to various random package views. So this one from Tierney, and he was just talking about different ways of sorting search. Downloads high, low, downloads high, most recent published, least recent published, most dependents, least dependents. Just running a few different ways of kind of sorting things. Now, I think there's a question about whether or not this is, I feel like this is linked to metadata in the sense that we could use some of the new forms of metadata that were one way to like sort things, but it's maybe like a follow. I don't think we need to get directly into this right now, but one thing that I do think is a theme that I've been seeing, and we'll talk about a little bit later, around search in general and improvements that we should be considering making to search. Does anyone have any thoughts about this specific item before we move on? Cool.
No.
So, yeah, and then this one is like kind of gets even more into like kind of the need for search in general, which is identify, label library forks and score and sort them appropriately. This is an interesting one because what's being asked for here is essentially like there's some package, and they give like this example from our search where like ODC provider is like the actual one, but then like a particular company's implementation of a fork of it is like higher in the search. When you go through, you see a whole bunch of different forks that are actually coming up that are all like why are they there? Why are we showing all these things when we should just show kind of like the actual maintained upstream package? Now, I push back a little bit on displaying a fork. They use GitHub as an example here because in GitHub we have a semantic link there. If someone forks a package, that was like an action that they took. So we're displaying kind of like a semantic link. And in fact, they need to remove the fact that it's a fork. Whereas like for us to come up with something like that on NPM, we would have to either be like guessing this through heuristics or like finding some way through like GitHub auth or something to like get this information. Either way, it's like people can put whatever information they want in the package JSON. We don't verify that at all, which you know was kind of one of the other topics we talked about last week was talking about, or 2 weeks ago was talking about like, hey, there's no way to know that like this information is verified, and kind of like stepping back. And the user actually even came seeing this and pointed at the auditor validates certain unique details, which was the one we talked about 2 weeks ago. Some of this actually comes down to the problem of search in general. So it's like discoverability of high quality packages is really what people are asking for. And what they're pointing out are like the things that are causing noise. So I have a feeling, and I'd love to get people's take on here. I'd love to add something under future, and like you could start as a card like these ones, and then we could scope it out a little bit more into exploring. But just kind of like, I believe that this would be something like registry general improvements to search. And kind of the idea here, and this is something that we can dig into because I don't want to make any sort of commitment to how we will solve this. But it feels like, and maybe this become a broader topic that we get into, right? The issue on identifying forks, this issue on auditing certain unique things about the package JSON, this discussion about random views. And other things that we've seen well are all about like improving discoverability of high quality packages. All of this comes down to search. And I think it's easy to get focused on like the particular thing that's noisy in our results and think that we need to fix that. But I think we need to step back and just kind of think of search holistically. I would love just like if people agree with that assessment is kind of like the thing that we should be looking at to solve this. And B, I guess if anyone has any concerns about adding this under future, I don't want to commit to when we do this work right now. But I think from an exploring perspective, this is something that we should be starting to scope out, thinking about something that we could do in the next couple of quarters.
I think this makes sense. There's a ton of improvements that can be made to search already. I was trying to find the existing capabilities of the registry endpoints that we have for search, see where like we're limited. But yeah, no, I think there's definitely like improvements. I think it's going to be attached to a bunch of the other tasks that are on here, like you said, like metadata, like surfacing metadata and like coming up with the heuristics of like identifiers for packages, including like the work that I think is already queued up right now for improvements to the quality scoring. That's all going to tie into making that search like a better search experience possible. So yeah, no, I think it's good to have like on the radar.
Yeah, I guess one way of thinking about this too is like in the same way that we're doing a whole bunch of backend work, and this backend work is kind of resulting in like a refresh to the website on packages and potentially search as well. Like once we have, as you said, like all that additional new metadata, all those new signals about packages, we should maybe use that as an opportunity to step back and rethink the way in which we're doing search. We also have authentication and deeper integration with GitHub. GitHub has their own search capabilities as well. So I think there'll be like a lot of different ways, like once we're kind of past this package metadata work or have landed some of it, this seems like a very logical next thing to focus on as like a general improvement that we can make to the registry. And I think also, at least for myself as a longtime NPM user, there's a lot of different web pages that I've used over the years to get high quality or better quality search, because I found that like the npm.js search can be noisy. So this to me seems like a pretty obvious way of improving the overall experience for everyone, both module authors who want to have their packages discovered, as well as like developers who are trying to find high quality packages. Cool. So we've got this on here, and I'll follow up with those ones afterwards. So the next larger area that we have today is improvements to 2FA publishing and tokens. We have an update from Ed on the Who Am I endpoint, and then I'd like to talk about this one new discussion topic that came up. Ed, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, so for the work that we did with automation tokens late last quarter, early this quarter, where you can now create a personal access token that doesn't require 2FA, so you can use it in automation workflows, even if you have 2FA on for your user. One of the things that we did when we did that work was intentionally reduce the scope of that token so that it can publish, but it can't like change user permissions, for example. It's a intentionally scoped down so that if it were to leak, which would be terrible, of course, but we're trying to reduce the blast radius as much as possible. One of the things that we didn't add to the allow list of API endpoints was the Who Am I API, which turns out was actually a little more tricky to get working than we expected, because like I said, when we did the work to scope it down, we actually did have to make a few changes to things, and we had to go back and make those changes to the Who Am I endpoint as well. So it wasn't just a trivial allow list. So I apologize for the delay in getting that done. But we did, in fact, get that done. That launched yesterday, I believe. So now you can use Who Am I endpoints. And I know that some people's workflow was blocked by that limitation. So yeah, so that should be resolved now.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. So this is an interesting discussion that came up, I think like the day after, 2 days after our last meeting, so just missed it. But someone opened this discussion about organization/team tokens. So right now, tokens are at a user level. And so a token is created by a user, a services account is with an email. And this is a similar complaint to what we saw on the ask for per package tokens, where just like the breadth of a token is a little bit too wide. So the ask here, which I think is reasonable, is could we have tokens that are generated for an organization that can have access to all of the packages of that team/organization, so you can generate one token for that team. I guess the thought that I had here, and I'd love folks to chime in, is we have an existing work item that we've put on the roadmap. It's still exploring. We haven't committed to when the work will be done. Scoped tokens. A lot of the feedback that I had seen from folks had a similar premise, like the scope of a token for a user is not great and can, in fact, cover too many modules, which you wouldn't want, which kind of led us to package scope tokens. My gut on this would be that maybe we don't want organization/team tokens, at least not as a priority over package scope tokens, because they similarly have it's like a shotgun, because if a team has a package, it's going to cover all of those teams' packages. Now, I can see how this could be really useful if, for example, we're publishing a monorepo, and a monorepo has like 15 packages in it, and then you add all those to the team, because you might have like a single CI job to publish all of those. So like, I could see how a package-based token could be blocked here. But I do feel like a lot of the other like non-monorepo use cases, the package-based token is made a little bit more, makes a little more sense. I'd love to ask folks what their thoughts are on this, and if you think that we should be tracking a separate organization team token work item, and if that's something that we'd want to prioritize.
I'll let Ed have probably the final word on this, but I feel like, yeah, this is definitely a very broad scope, and like the fact that you have to create like a team account, or like you have to create like this extra like account because like every action should be associated with like an account at the end of the day, kind of creates some ambiguity. And I think as you started this off, Miles, like you noted that I think what people actually want is more limited tokens, like per package tokens, I think should be like highest priority. And then these other kind of like use cases we could look at, but like right now I like in our tokens to be like personal access tokens, and like I don't know what the equivalent would be, PATs in GitHub. I don't know what the equivalent is, or if GitHub even does can like have something similar for like at an organization level. So or team level. Yeah, the nuance here is I just feel like there's probably a lot of complexity living under the water here. Yeah, just this second bullet scares me, like having to create a service account that is used with a token and associated with it gets a bit nebulous, like compared to knowing which user is actually like tied to the token and responsible for the actions that are associated with it. I don't know. Yeah, I know that people are kind of working around this today. Yeah, go ahead.
Like you can do that today, I guess, by literally making an account with a new email address that is your service account, and then just adding that to all of the packages that you want. Like you can do this manually yourself. So I guess then the ask would be like, is there a way that we could do this without requiring me to like make a new account? It's like, I guess to the point you're making is like making a service account and then adding things into the scope of that service account. So I guess, yeah, like really what they're asking for here, kind of like a service account, and being able to, I guess, for an org or a team, make a shadow service account for that organization. And I think to the point that you're raising, like that does start peeling a lot of different complexity that's very different than generating a token for a package. I guess though, the only thing that is in the back of my head is, as we continue to prioritize work in the CLI around workspaces, how to ensure that like the tokens that we're having in the publishing, like we have like a good publish flow for workspaces, because the per package tokens doesn't scale to workspaces. And now we're telling people to go back to using user accounts, single user accounts. So I think what we'll find as a possibility, once we have per package token, and if we only have per package tokens and authentication tokens, that like people may be doing this, like creating their own service account accounts in order to publish from a workspace, or alternatively having to have like a separate CI job for every single module in the workspace and generating a custom token for each one of those, which, you know, for a repo like Babel that has like 20 plus packages, that's rather annoying and repetitive. So I feel like there is a bit of a gap there. We're going to continue to push workspaces, and we don't really have like a similar secure story.
Yeah, interesting. I'm also concerned about like a really widely privileged token, like adding a new really widely privileged token that isn't mapped to a user. So like auditing who published is like, who knows? So I'm definitely not saying no, but I'm also not at the point where I'm like, yeah, we should definitely do this and prioritize it. I think it bears, I feel like a lot more investigation is probably needed here, personally.
Yeah. So I feel like, and the team can tell me their thoughts. I feel like the priority here that should lead us would not be like the implementation of like organization / team tokens, but rather like secure workflows for publishing from mono repos or workspaces. Like, to me, that like thinking about this right now and thinking about the tokens that we have, like that's going to be the thing that's like a pain in the ass. So it's like whether that's like a meta token, for example, like when you go to create a token, like let's say you're making a, like if we have per package tokens, right? But per package tokens are still associated with the user who created that token. Maybe you're able to add multiple packages to that same token. Because if you think about like what we're doing right now with the user token, that is just, hey, the user, all the packages. The package token is, hey, just one of the packages. A workspace token could be a collection of packages that user has access to. And it's no worse than what we have already available with automation tokens. And I feel like that kind of covers the scope and ask here, which is, I want N packages, not all packages or one package.
Yeah, I totally think it's important that we give people, like, I originally looked at that as like a long time ago, like just like scoping when you're generating token, essentially having scope for access. So not just read write, but also for yeah, the packages that are associated that you already have access to essentially like create a multi like a multi-package token. But I think like the highest priority is probably like at the individual per package token, and then, or like maybe we flip that and say, well, that's just the same, like that's two sides of the same coin. Like if you only want one, you scope that token to be associated with one, you know, the work is the same to support N versus one.
Oh, it's a workspace with only one package in it.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even use like the term workspace, but you just want to essentially permission like the token for multiple packages, right?
Collection, group.
Yeah, collection, group, like those terms. Yeah, I would say like scope of this access token has access to read write to XYZ packages.
Yeah, I could see that actually being like really interesting. And like, I'm not saying that this isn't not a team token when you break it apart, but it's like, let's say you have private packages and you want to scope read, right? Instead of giving someone read access to like 15 individual different things, you make a single like read token that is scoped to like 10 packages. But at that point, now it's just like, okay, well, like, why didn't we just make a team and make a team token and put the packages into that team?
I think it's access associated then with like no one. Like I don't know. Like I think it's like when you publish, there should be an individual that was associated with the publish. Like there should be a count, one single count that was associated with that publish. So that's where if we like if we get that far down the line of that thinking, it gets a bit nebulous. Like I'm sure there's edges to
I
creating
guess
team tokens. Yeah.
I guess though, and like you can like we'd have to figure this out is like if a team or a group of people who are managing a package, a large package, are generating an automation token that they can use, even if it's per package. And there's one person who generated that token that isn't actually indicative of like whose commit landed and kicked off CD. So like at the end of the day, if we're talking about a team that has more than one person, it will always be the person who generated the token whose name gets associated with it, whether or not they're actually the person who kicked off that job. So I think that like Ed, to what you were saying earlier about like wanting it to be associated with a person rather than a team is actually a bit of a misnomer, because yeah, it will get associated with a person, but like you're still going to have to look at the general audit trail of like who kicked off the job or who landed the PR that kicked off CD, because the token will still just be owned by whoever generated it, not who did the action. So like whether or not that scope is a team or an individual, like it actually, in my personal opinion, doesn't give you any more insight from an audit perspective. You do need to go and look at like, what was the commit that triggered the action? What was the PR? You can't even look at the commit. You need to look at like who actually landed it. And then you may even have to look at like who reviewed it. If we're talking about like truly post-morteming things, and if it gets compromised, right? It doesn't even necessarily mean that like that person's machine was compromised. If that token is living on like a Jenkins box somewhere or on a VM somewhere, it means that like the host that had that token was compromised. I think I'm talking myself into team tokens somehow.
Yeah, one thing that I was just thinking, listening to the conversation, I also think the team metaphor like is really close to the way we manage things in the GitHub side of things, right? So what if maybe we decouple the two things and just maybe we just want to have all this like collection of package or teams in the NPM website kind of interface, but at the same time, like you can create, each user can create like an independent token out of that team. So basically they can create a token that has all the permissions that the team has permissions to access, but on his behalf, right? Like it is a user token, but with those access.
So that like the actual underlying token that you're doing is a group of packages that we were talking about, but that we have like a shortcut on the team page to generate a token that has all of the packages of that team.
Yeah, something like that.
I guess
workflow like that.
I guess the only thing that would be not great about that would be that token would be a snapshot of the team, whereas like a true team token would be one that like you could add or remove packages from the team, and that would, the token's access would reflect that. So in theory, like you could, and actually this is a really good point that we should keep in mind, is like revoking these tokens, right? Like if you just generated like a random thing from one user for n packages, you have to revoke that user's access to the packages or revoke the entire token. You can't like remove a package from the scope of that token. Whereas like if I think about something like GCP and a service account, I can have a service account that I generate like a token with, and then I can modify the IAM of that service account without having to revoke the service account or revoke the token. And that's extremely useful. If you have, for example, like a release team, and that release team has a release token, and the scope of that team changes over time. You can keep like the same token in the same infrastructure and manage the IAM without having to go through and kind of like poke the bear of your infrastructure that you have set up. So I guess maybe stepping back, there's kind of two separate things or three separate things that we may want to think about here. One is tokens for groups of packages, and whether or not like the per package token, we want to be able to make a many instead of a one. Because right now it's scoped to one, but we could scope it to many, which could partially cover this use case, or at the very least, maybe even create like the backend infrastructure that's necessary for thinking of collections of packages. Then there's separately, like, I think IAM as a whole that we need to think through. And like we have that work item on there for like GitHub account linking and login with GitHub that's going to like unearth some of this as well. But like, how do we think about access management? And then there's like this third thing, which is like the intersection of these, which is like when we have access management, other than just on a user basis, do we want to have like tokens like for these different parts of the hierarchy? It starts to get like a lot closer to like service accounts, which are far more complex from an access management perspective than I think anything that we have right now. Because right now it's kind of like an all or nothing token. We don't have this idea of like a token with a limited scope that can change through its lifetime. And even GitHub, if I recall, you generate the token. I don't think you edit what that token has access to. You blow it away and make a new token.
I forget. I think you might be able to actually, which is weird.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So I think that we've probably spent enough time scratching our heads on this. As a follow-up, going back to the roadmap here, we have per package scoped automation tokens for publishing. Do we want to add a note to this? Like, just like we can add something here as like questions. Should this token be scoped to a single package or be able to scope to a group of packages? Are people cool with just adding this to this work item so we don't kind of lose that train of thought?
Yep.
Cool. Then separately, do you think that something like this makes sense, like a meta about access control review? I'm mixed if we should add this, but it just kind of feels like, especially when we're thinking about GitHub versus NPM, but maybe this is like a sub item of something like Explore authentication with GitHub. Should we add anything about this like access control stuff, or just leave it for right now?
You can leave it, or you can add it as you said, like as a sub item to that Explore authentication with GitHub. I think it's far enough out that it probably would get like somehow tied up with that work, or like follow that work, right?
Okay. And then I guess as a last bit, do we want to like have something exploring like team or organization tokens specifically? Do we want to add something to the roadmap for that? Or do we think that like for right now, like we need to focus on the package scope tokens and maybe revisit this broader
Yeah,
later?
I think that
What
makes
are the
sense. I think I concede that service accounts are not ideal, but I think that they're an adequate workaround for now. Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you
Okay.
can't do this.
Yeah, because like someone creating, so someone can manually create their own service account email, use that account to manage the permissions of all the packages and generate an automation token for that account. Yeah, I guess like, and this would not be like me pressing for us, would be like, because I don't know that NPM has this, but GitHub does have stuff in their terms of service about like not having multiple accounts. So like it would be good to make sure that like solutions to this space don't potentially violate like those terms of services. Probably not good to advise people to do things that violate the terms of services, but at least for right now, it's doable, as opposed to like arbitrary tokens that have groups of packages. And I guess like if we had package group tokens, we could explore making them editable during their life cycle, which in turn could like be the groundwork of this kind of. Okay, cool. I'll take care of answering this issue based on our discussion. And I think we're good to move on to the next item. So NPM's role as a registry steward, we discussed this briefly 2 weeks ago on some topics. There were 2 new topics that came up on the discussions that are kind of aligned with this as well. So the auditor validates certain unique details of the package. I think that actually I scoped this one, but the standardization of entry points is definitely one that kind of falls here. So the request came that like people are publishing packages, things that aren't just JS. So for example, there's a bunch of like CSS and Sass packages in the ecosystem that publish CSS modules, PM, but there's no official entry point for other languages in the package JSON. And so projects like Bootstrap, Tailwind, and Normalize use the style property in CSS. Bootstrap exposes Sass for the Sass version of the module. So, and there's tools like NPM CSS that solve bundling CSS from these locations. There's also like they're mentioning consensus around like a TypeScript property. And so they were kind of requesting standardization. So I wrote an essay here because I have feelings about standards. But like one of the things that I kind of pointed out was, at least in Node, the implementation of like Node's internal resolver is something that's owned by Node and it's not standard. Node has recently formalized around this concept of like a package export app for specifying the entry points of different resolvers, and it's extendable. So like the example here, like Node here and require an import are like things that Node understands. Browser isn't something that Node understands, it will ignore. But both Webpack now understand how to like look for exports browser as a place to hook in rather than just like the top level package browser field. But this is more of like it's a convention rather than a standard. And like that was a lot of, I was part of the team that designed this in Node. A lot of it was like to try to design like more or less like a bucket where all this stuff can just go and create a convention that folks could use. And so I talked about how other environments could build on this. And there is standardization that's happening for CSS modules. So like, in the not too distant future, Node may even be able to just like straight up resolve CSS modules. What will turn it into is up in the air. CSS and HTML modules and WebAssembly modules and JSON modules are all things that are kind of going through standards track right now, which is kind of like the standardized side of it. And that doesn't really have anything to do with how a runtime's resolver finds that disk, but it's more about how once it finds that resource, how does it parse it? How does it turn it into an object? How is that object represented? All that fun stuff. So I did mention that like standardizing these entry points are out of scope for NPM itself. Like we are not a standards body. We can't standardize things. And further, I feel like, and this is one of the places where I'd love to get folks from the team's 2 cents, that it's like a scope for us as NPM to just kind of declare something as standard. We don't own the package JSON. It's kind of owned by the ecosystem. And that like a lot of these standards are, you know, meant as like a vendor neutral place for multiple vendors to collaborate on something, but often it follows implementation. So you have implementation, you have differing implementation across multiple vendors, and you standardize to make sure that all these different implementations are the same. I suggested the WICG, which is the Web Incubator Community Group, which is the W3C. The WICG is a great place for new concepts to come and like kind of bake before they're ready to be adopted more broadly in the standard. For example, import maps is a feature that has been baking in WCG for quite some time, which would allow for like bare imports inside of browsers to kind of some behavior that Node has around being able to import modules. It would just be like a different mechanism for doing it. I suggested that as like a venue where standardizing the package JSON might be able to happen. But it's also one of those things where like you kind of NPM and Yarn and Node and TypeScript and like all of the different people who rely on package JSONs to kind of agree like, hey, we want to lock this thing even. We want to have a process for what it means to expand this. I think that there's also some stuff here around like the format stuff that we're talking about between types, other ways of identifying the format of a package, where we would benefit from like more explicit standardization, not just like implementation around this. If there was a way that was like in stone, like if it has X, we know it's Y, that would help us. But so kind of stepping back to the question and context where it was framed is I feel like the answer to this question is like, this is a cool thing and it's something we might participate in. I don't feel like it is ours to decide, but I also feel like as stewards of the registry, we do have a disproportionate amount of power in that if we choose not to support something and we choose not to escalate it, then it has probably less chance of adoption. And on the flip side, like we'll probably see with the types and TypeScript, if we do choose to privilege something in the package JSON, that will encourage usage in the ecosystem and broad adoption. So I guess now my question to the team is, like, how do we act as in good faith as stewards here? How do we make sure that, like, you know, we're doing what's best for our ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Broad, pretty broad scope of a discussion. I think specifically on this, like, I think you had the right initial thought, Miles, with like, this is maybe a little bit beyond the scope of what we can, like, as you said, like, we can't like really say that we're like choosing something and standardizing it, but based on what we support and implement, like that does eventually become like a standard. I think that's like a meta topic of like, how do we choose what fields we support, and like standardization as a whole, like I feel like a huge bag of like, that's like a huge discussion to be had. Yeah, I don't know. For this specifically, I think we asked that, you know, the community, that community essentially tries to align on what they think is right. And I think that you gave some good like references to where they could have that discussion. Like, yeah, like I think it's up to, you know, the makers of those libraries to try to like essentially standardize like the API and like how they want to essentially distribute their that type of package. yeah, it's a like
So
I haven't played in the CSS world in a while, so can't say exactly like what
I thought that I
recommended.
Yeah, a thought that I just had, and I'd love to get everyone's 2 cents on it, is like, so we have this, make it easier to identify the format of a pack item. Obviously, I have a bias about it because someone I really like opened this suggestion. But it's mostly going to be kind of like a follow to the work that we're doing in TypeScript. So for identifying TypeScript, we're looking at the package JSON, we're looking at the types field. There's also some work with like external information from definitely types. So it's not all just straightforward, but we do need to implement something in our pipeline that looks at the package JSON, looks at heuristics in the package JSON. And if certain heuristics are met, like adds a flag or a signal or something to say this module is X. I won't make any commitments like where that happens in the pipeline, or if this is just something we look at the package later. But at some point, there needs to be some bit of code that can be fed a package or a package JSON and spit out heuristics of the module. That needs to exist. So one of the things that we're talking about as a follow here is something that would look at the exports field, for example, and be able to say, okay, well, like if there is a require entry, we know for a fact that this module has a common JS entry point. If there's an import entry, we know for a fact this module has an ESM entry point. If there's a .mjs file in the tree or a .cj file in the tree, that also gives us a similar heuristic. Although I think scoping just to the package JSON right now is probably better. In a way, for better or for worse, once we start making like some piece of code that does this, this almost becomes the standard. I think in at least the way the ask was here, as far as like, it is the way that we are identifying it. It is the way that we're signaling it on the website. So a thought that I'm having here, and I'd love to be either talked off this bridge or gassed up, depending on how y'all feel about it, would be if we could make an open source JavaScript module that does these heuristics. And even maybe like a tiny spec. So like the JavaScript module could be just be an implementation of a spec that says, when you see X, it means Y. We could make a process for external contributors to make additions to said spec and implementation to identify other things, whether it be a CSS, TypeScript, or ESM, or rollup, or whatever. And it could be like a clear process of like, you need to be like the implementer, you need to have a certain amount of usage. Like we can come up with kind of like what those expectations are. But maybe something that could very well be like within our scope is making whatever heuristics we use documented and have a implementation, even if it's not what we use in production, but an open source implementation that other people can rely on for getting the same information, and making an open source process so that folks can contribute to it. And it's not just us kind of keeping it. I feel like something like that could eventually become a standard or something that's owned in an open source way that like we at NPM implement rather than own. And I think this starts to look kind of like what is being asked for here. So maybe we can kind of like, I think the best standards are ones that start from actual implementations and then move forward. So maybe we could start by just being really open about our heuristics in our implementation, and then kind of and make it easy for other people to collaborate and then kind of take it from there. And if we see lots of different people start using this implementation, and if there's concerns about kind of like vendor neutrality and the maintainership of it, then we can kind of explore open like findings or standards as a home for such a thing when it is a thing that's actually being used widely. How do folks feel about that?
Certainly, I think publishing the mechanisms that we use to decorate, say, TypeScript, or if we do, you know, if we go further and look at like ESM or something, yeah, we should definitely be publishing that, in my opinion. Whether we actually publish a package and code or not is a bit of a different question. I think also probably, yeah, but you know, bare minimum, we should be publishing our, you know, the mechanism by which we do this.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of like spec plus code plus test, of thinking about like when we're thinking about like what makes a standard. It's kind of the combination of all of those. And we definitely could iterate on it. I like the idea of at least starting with documenting this publicly, even if it's just some like really, really basic spec language saying, if this, then that. So maybe, I guess I'm just trying to think about next steps on this one. We have the roadmap item for TypeScript. Should we make like I guess like make it easier to identify the format of a package? I feel like what we could do is like have a registry item for just this one, if we're going to explore it, and have kind of like part of it being should we have publicly available documentation on how this works? Should we have open prod for augmenting / updating? How do people feel about just kind of adding this, and I can flesh it out a bit more? And we could have it here under future and exploring, so it doesn't mean that we're like committing to when this work be done. But at least to myself, we've talked about this enough that like ongoing efforts in improving this seems like something that's on our radar. And this at least kind of tracks this other part of the work around and making it publicly accessible. People feel good about this? Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of the hour. Thank you, everyone who joined on YouTube. If you bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to go ahead and look at YouTube and make sure that we don't have any comments or questions. And I do not see anything in the chat, but that doesn't actually mean that the chat is working.